Senate to throw a Republican majority at this moment, especially a Senate that with a party that is led by Donald Trump. And so that is of grave concern. It is the case that Maryland has now become a center point. Maryland is now, our race is a national race. It is not a race where only Marylanders are concerned about the outcome. You should know that people all across our country are focused on what happens in Maryland and are focused on the result of this election. And so I regard it as a high privilege that I've had the opportunity to travel all around our state, to talk to Marylanders where they are, to introduce myself, to discuss with them my own values, to talk with them about my views, to talk with them about the work that I've been able to do in Maryland as a Marylander. So let me just also disclose to you that I have just enjoyed so thoroughly the chance to serve in public office over 27 years. I was raised by two absolutely incredible parents, very working class, didn't have the chance to go to college, but they shared with me early on, one, that it was my obligation to care for my neighbors, and two, that there was no higher calling than that of public service. I should also share with you, and I just enjoyed sharing some of the people who have been in my life, because I hope it will help you to understand something about my own values. And I want to quickly share with you today the story of Sarah. Sarah Daisy was her name, Alsobrooks. She was my father's mother. She was my grandmother. And Sarah Daisy raised my father, his two siblings, and one other family member in a one-bedroom apartment in Northeast Washington, D.C. Sarah was a housekeeper who worked in hotels in and around the D.C. area. But it was her great dream, my father told me, to work in the federal government. And many of you probably recall that there was a time where to do that, you had to take a civil servants exam, and you also had to take a typing test. And he told me that my grandmother couldn't afford a typewriter. And so she went in the family's kitchen, put a white piece of paper on the refrigerator, she taped it there. She drew a keyboard on the white piece of paper, and so he said she stood in front of the refrigerator until she learned the keystrokes. Learned those keystrokes, took the civil servants exam and the typing test, got herself a job in the federal government, and I am her legacy. Now, it is important to understand, because this for me is kind of what the American Dream is about, to also share with you that Sarah bought the apartment to raise her kids in before the end of her life. And that is the story of the American Dream. But what it helps me to understand, and I say so strongly, is we all want the same things for our families. I've come to understand that through my interactions with people in every stage of my life. Is don't we want the same things? To have safe and affordable places to live. We want for all of our children, no matter where they live, to have the single best education possible. We want, when our loved ones are sick or if we're sick, we want to have access to quality and affordable health care. And I have come to understand through my conversations with so many, the number one issue all across our state, most especially with our children, is they want to have true economic opportunities in this country. To feel that, like their parents and grandparents, they too can buy a home, that they will be able to afford to care for themselves. And so these are the things that I have spent my time and effort working toward over the last 27 years. And again, I have done so very joyfully, believing so many. I can say in this room also that I think it is significant, and I've shared this with a number of you who have met on occasion, to talk about the principle that Rabbi Prince talked about at the March on Washington. When he spoke directly before Dr. Martin Luther King, his voice was the last voice that was heard. And he said something that is so profound. And he said, you know, God created all of us as neighbors. But the concept of neighbor is not a geographic term, it's a moral one. It helps us to understand the true obligation we have to care for each other. You should also know, you can look at me and tell this already, that I'm a middle-aged lady. I was born in the 1970s. I'm a 70s baby. I was born in 1970. And what that means for me is that I had dinner table discussions, because my family had dinner together every single week. And it was the case that we had so many robust conversations. And on the edge of the civil rights movement, you can imagine that a lot of it had to do with the civil rights movement. And there was no discussion about the civil rights movement without discussing the relationship between the Jewish community and the Black community. And the fact that we were allies, and what that meant for us to have been allies, and in all of our efforts, how we could count on the shared friendship, and that we were allies with the Jewish community. So that's how I was raised. It is what I believe, is what I continue to believe. And so in this moment, when we find ourselves asking about allies and friends, I'm ever mindful of the long-standing relationship between the African American and the Jewish in the time of trouble. Now, I'm going to tell you about my work journey in a moment, but before I get there, I do want to just tell you that I also had a really great opportunity to travel to Israel, and believe it or not, to tell you how lucky I was, December of 2019. So that's what you call good luck, right? And I was invited there by a friend of mine. His name is Yehuda Newberger. And Yehuda and I met over education policy. He wanted to meet with me. He's very interested in education. And he said, you know what, I'm going to invite you at some point to join a trip where we take a number of leaders to Israel. And he kept his promise. And so December of 19, I was invited to have a trip, to have the opportunity to go to Israel. My experience there, I can tell you, is defined. My father used to say something when I was younger. He desperately wanted sons. He got 2 daughters. And so he therefore calls me little fella to this day. And he used to say, you know, little fella, do you know the problem with people? And I often say, well, what is it? And he said, you know, they know more than they understand. And I think those are such profound sentiments. People know more than they understand. And he urged me in everything that I would do to try to make sure you understood as much as you know. And so the trip to Israel, I think, is, well, I think those words really are appropriate, is going to Israel and having the opportunity to travel. We traveled with a historian. We had the opportunity to visit the Knesset. We had the opportunity to go to Golan Heights and talk about security. We talked about the Iron Dome. We met with military officials. We really had the opportunity there to get a sense of the concern, the safety and security concerns that were real time happening in Israel. And we got to discuss the shared interest that the United States and Israel have. And so that we have not only shared values around democracy and freedom and human rights, but there are also a number of shared interests that we have and that keep us as allies. And so those are things that I came to understand, which is why October 7th for me was so shocking. Because following my trip to Israel, as I mentioned, I had a number of conversations. My friends continued to have discussions. We talked about the Abraham Accords. They would, every time they thought there was something new that they would bring me up to date on, they say, let's jump on a Zoom call. Even during COVID, we jumped on Zoom calls to talk. And so October 7th for me felt really shocking. It's like after all we had discussed and the security concerns that we discussed, I have to be honest with you, I never thought that we would ever experience what we experienced on October 7th. So needless to say, it was very devastating to watch and hard to fathom. I had the chance to talk also with a young woman who was actually in this field today that had heard and just kind of accounting for me what her experience was. And so the shared, I agree with the president, I think has been really great. I think he's been, I know that people talk so much about President Biden's age. I tell you, you have to have been his age to have the experience that he's had, I think, to lead our country in so many challenging times. His experience, I think, is showing. And so the shared value, first of all, of removing the threat of Hamas from the world is one that we've all very committed to the real belief that Israel has a right to defend itself. Also understanding, I've been seeing more and more the real heartbreak around the hostages and the families who are awaiting, and we can only imagine, and we probably know who are there, who are awaiting the safe return of their family members. And so returning the hostages to their family is also a priority that remains for all of us. And then I know it is the case that we are hoping, as complicated as it is, I am still hoping that we are able to move towards ceasefire, that we can address some of the issues that are occurring daily, the humanitarian aid that has to get into Gaza for the Palestinians who are there, the real concern around civilians who are dying and having that not be the case. And then, of course, as complicated as it is, and my friends are telling me, it's very complicated, but the two-state solution, that it is my great hope that we will be able to have safety and security for Israel, and that we will have safety and security for the Palestinians of Gaza. And so I am committed to the U.S.-Israeli relationship. We are allies, we are friends, and we are committed to ensuring that we are there every moment to make sure that Israel continues to have the ability to defend itself, and to stand strong as a democratic presence in that part of the world. And can tell you that I continue again. I've been following closely, and I can only imagine if it is the case. Every morning I wake up, and I am not kidding, the first thing I do is to open my phone, because things are happening so real time that I find that you almost have to check throughout the day to see what is happening. And so I continue to follow. And I know you all have more specific questions as well, and I'll be happy to answer them. But I am following real time the things as things are happening there. I quickly want to shift, because it is the case that I have a record that I also want to share with you. You know, I've mentioned to some of you that I did a very dangerous thing. And my parents, as I mentioned, my mom was a receptionist for the 50 years she worked. She is, I have to tell you, one of the best models of womanhood I have ever known. Just a really beautiful, strong, hardworking person. My father, likewise, I've told you a couple of things he said, so you know that I believe he's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. Didn't have the chance to go to college. He worked as a newspaper distributor for the Washington Post newspaper, and then went on to sell cars. And he's doing a little of that now to care for my mother, who has pretty serious illnesses. But the two of them, again, made it possible for me to serve. So in 1997, I was so lucky. I was hired as the first full-time domestic violence prosecutor to work in the state's attorney's office in Prince George's County. And I have grown my service over the years based on a lot of experiences I've had. And one of the experiences that has really stuck with me is, as a prosecutor, I stood in a courtroom for 13 years watching people seek second chances. And it became so obvious to me that many of the people that I saw there had never had the first chance at success, meaning we had not invested in mental health care. I saw what happens when we had not invested in addictions care, what happens when we really didn't have affordable housing, safe housing for people, and what happens when people lacked hope because they felt there was no economic opportunity. And so I decided that I was not going to simply react to what I saw as systemic issues. I was going to solve it. And so I ran for county executive in 2018, and I've gotten to work. When I was state attorney, as you heard, I kept my promises. I was elected in 2010, and I oversaw a 50% cut violent in Prince George's County when I served as the state's attorney there. But I also made sure that I created important restorative justice programs for our kids, an anti-truancy program that I created called I Belong Here to keep middle school kids in school. I created a program for nonviolent drug offenders. I worked with the community college to get them to get them workforce training. And if they were successful after 12 to 18 months, I went in to get probation before judgment, to take the felony off their record and to guarantee them a job. But what I can tell you, again, is that I went to the county executive's office to make the right investments. Quickly, I want to tell you what some of them have been. And one is that Prince George's has the second oldest school facilities in the state of Maryland. Over 40% of our schools are 60 years old or older. And I don't have to tell you what message our kids get if they're in buildings that are dilapidated. Decided to change it. So I worked with our school superintendent, and we built and pushed the first of its kind structure in the state to build schools using a public-private partnership. We did so more quickly and at a 20% cost savings. And over the last 3 years, even in the middle of COVID, because I was in office 1 year when COVID-19 happened, you could imagine that we were the second largest county in the state. But we used that structure over the last 3 years to break ground on 10 new schools. We opened 6 of them in the fall. We're using the same structure to break ground on another 8 this year. So as county executive, we will have broken ground on a grand total of 18 schools in a 6-year period for the benefit of our children. I can also tell you, and I will discuss this where the Senate is concerned, the true passion I have around healthcare access. And one of the issues for me has been, I believe we've misdiagnosed what I have often seen as a public health crisis, called it a crime crisis. And by that, I mean, Prince George's, would you believe that over 70% of the people we arrest every day there and take to the local departments of correction are intoxicated upon arrival? And a third of all the people we arrest every day and take to the departments of correction are on psychotropic medications. So we are arresting and recycling sick people who are sick with addiction and sick with mental illness. And I believe put them in places where they can't be healed. So I decided to change that as well. And in 2022, I built our county's first ever mental health care and addictions care facility to open its doors. And we have expanded behavioral health across our county. I can tell you, I also noticed that Prince George's had the highest rate of breast, lung, colorectal, and prostate cancer in the region. We're the only major county without a freestanding cancer center. So I was able to get $67 million. And guess what? February 15th, we opened our first ever freestanding cancer center in Prince George's County so that our loved ones can get cancer care right at home. And finally, because again, I'll answer questions and I could go on and on about the work we've done, but economic opportunity. You know, I've talked to our kids who have said to me, you know, we don't want the Democratic Party to continue talking to us about low inflation. We don't want to hear about low unemployment when we don't know whether we're even going to be able to afford the cost of housing. And so economic opportunity is something I prioritize, which is why I was so proud to work with Congressman Hoyer, who is such a great friend, has been a friend to me. And we brought back that national FBI headquarters to Prince George's County, to the state of Maryland, coming here. Now, you all are clapping, but let me tell you, you watched the Virginians were less impressed with us, right? The Virginians they were less pleased. They were very distraught about this. Because they understand what we do. How we use your federal taxpayer dollars to build job centers changes the economy of the areas where it goes, and it changes generationally. It means transformational wealth to the areas where we place it, which is why Fairfax County is the second wealthiest county in the United States of America, because the Pentagon is there. And so bringing that kind of investment has been important. We've done it through the FBI. I've also been able to attract $100 million in new investment to the new Carrollton Metro Station in just the last 2 years, using a combination of federal, state, and county funding to grow 25,000 jobs and create workforce housing. So I will be able to share more about what I've done on climate as you all are interested and other things, but let me just share this final thought. Freedom and justice and democracy. In a moment, how sad it is that we are fighting fights that honestly we thought we had already won. The fight for a woman's freedom and privacy to make decisions about our own bodies. This is a time we've never seen quite before. You know, and Larry Hogan, bless his heart, he came into the race at Mitch McConnell's invitation. He thought he'd said something so cute. He said, you know what? I understand the issue of abortion care because it's very emotional for the ladies. And we want Larry Hogan to know we don't need help with our emotions. We really don't. And furthermore, the right to make your own decisions is a foundational right. It is one that my daughter deserves, not to have to decide where to live in the country, or your grandchildren. Where should they live in the country based on where they might be free? We look at how ridiculous this is about not just abortion care. We understand that this fight is also expanded to reproductive care, trying to curtail the right to even have contraception. We see that IVF has been affected, and now they've lost their minds in Arizona and decided to pull out a law from the 1800s that we might arrest women and prosecute them. And so this party has now made the issue around women's choice is understanding it's not just a policy issue. This is the platform of the Republican Party. And it is the case that no matter what he says, we know that Larry Hogan will vote with the Republican caucus. He will. He was invited into this whole party by Mitch McConnell, who endorsed Donald Trump the next week. We already know what we're looking at in all of the things that are at stake, the Supreme Court. We know that the judges that we appoint, we understand the comprehensive immigration reform, voting rights, all of these things. We're going to have to eliminate the filibuster to get a lot of this done. And we're going to have to reform also that Supreme Court, because I don't know about you, I am sick of Clarence Thomas and very sick of his wife. We've got to make sure we have ethics, and we have a lot of work to do. But I can only do it through your help and support. I'll say this and take your questions. You all have already seen the race on that. So I don't even have to define it for you. $43 million that have been used to defeat me. $43 million. And so that you have, every time you turn the television on, Lord, you can't turn on your computer. You can't open up your mailbox without the mail falling out of the mailbox. And you haven't been able to hear. This is not how democracy works. But you know what? We are on course to win this race because of the people. I've been fortunate enough to be endorsed by people like Delegate Solomon, who have been out there. Our grassroots support is growing all across the state. People want a person in office who can deliver results and a person in office who understands and shares the cares and concerns of the people they represent. This is where we are, and we know that we have a 10-person delegation with 8 congressmen and 2 senators and no women, none whatsoever representing us in Washington. I think it's a great time to send a woman to Washington to make sure that the lived experiences of all of us are represented. And in fact, it ought to be the case that every one of us should look in the Senate and see some of ourselves, of every race, of every gender, and every background, because it makes our country's policies stronger. And so I want to thank you all again for having me. I know you're going to have some questions, and Ron's going to come up here and act as our moderator and help us to answer some questions. Thank you.
County Executive, thank you for being here today. I have a difficult question. Ron introduced you as being a strong supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship. You referenced Steny Hoyer in your remarks, who's an incredibly strong supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship. You're seeking to replace Ben Cardin, who's a champion of the U.S.-Israel relationship, but you were endorsed by Senator Chris Van Hollen, who is not a strong supporter, in my view, of the U.S.-Israel relationship, and honestly is on the other side of the spectrum. So my question for you is, if you are our next senator from the state of Maryland, where will you fall on the spectrum? Will you be with us, or will you be with the Senator Van Hollen?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you, I'll be with you. And let me just also say this. I get this question a lot. It's a reasonable question. But you should know that I am grateful for all of the folks who've come out to support me. That Senator Van Hollen, for example, endorsed me, before October 7th. But you should know that I also have the endorsement of 190 people across the state. And I don't agree on every single issue with any of the 190 of them, although I am grateful for their support. And so when people ask me, well, who will you be? Will you be Ben Cardin or Senator Van Hollen or Steny Hoyer? I think it's fair to say I'll be Angela also. That I do have my own views, that I have, to the best of my ability, I will share those views with you today. My own impressions and feelings and values are derived from my own experiences. I visited Israel for myself. I have friends with whom I've had the opportunity to discuss all of these issues. I read incessantly every day and pay attention to what is happening so that I will have very well informed views and opinions, but they will be my own, respectfully. They will be my own. They will not be anyone else's views. Although, like I said, I am grateful to have the support that I've had, both from Congressman Hoyer and from Senator Van Hollen, with whom I've done a lot of work. Senator Van Hollen and I, for example, have done a lot of work with veterans. We've delivered electric vehicles to my county. He's been a real ally in the work, and I look forward to working with all of them, but I think it is fair to say I will be my own.
County Executive, again, I echo the gratitude for your being here. I also associate myself with Harvey's question that you just answered. So having been supplanted by his question, I'll ask you another one, more general. What makes you more electable to beat Larry Hogan than your Democratic opponent?
Yeah, I thank you for that question. You know what? I thought I'd missed a couple of points, and that's one of them. I want to draw a contrast between me and first David Trump, and then tell you how I'm going to beat Larry Hogan. One of the points of contrast will be that I'm the only person in the race who has not been compromised where choice is concerned. And by that, I mean, Larry Hogan's record is he vetoed important abortion care legislation. When it was overridden, he withheld the funding for it. Recently, he was questioned about whether he would codify in federal law a woman's right to choose, and he said that he is not prepared to speculate on any legislation, which we interpret as no. But where David Trone is concerned, he is also a person whose record is concerning. You know, he spent upwards of $500,000 to support these radical Republicans across the country who want to ban abortion. People like Greg Abbott of Texas. You all remember Ken Paxton, the attorney general who sued the woman, and she had to move out of the state to get the abortion care she needed. People like Brian Kemp, who not only wants to ban abortion, but took hundreds of thousands of voters off the voter rolls. Well, these are people whose campaigns he supported trying to help them defeat Democrats. That's a problem. And by the way, it will be a problem for him in a general election also. So David Trone, and when questioned about why on earth he would have done this, he said, I quote, write checks to buy access. It is the case that he set aside his values, whatever they are, in favor of growing the bottom line of his business. That's a fact. And it's a fact that repeats itself over and over again. That challenge and many others are the reason that I would be better general election opponent to Larry Hogan than David Trone. I can tell you that I think that this is the problem. In a general election, what the Democratic Party must do is to put up a candidate who can energize the base of our party. If we put up a candidate and expect people to simply come to vote against Larry Hogan, this will not work. People won't come. We have to find a candidate who inspires people, excites them, and gives them something to vote for. And that includes women. It includes younger voters. It's going to also include minority voters across the state. We have to have a candidate with whom we can really draw a contrast with Larry Hogan. I think that there is respectfully too little contrast between the two rich guys in the race. And I think it's going to cause some people to stay home. And I think Larry Hogan knows this. He knows he prefer, I think, to run against David Trone. David Trone has also said, although he's opened up, I've had a race with two people. One has been David Trone and the other person in the race has been his wallet. Well, now he says he's going to leave his wallet at home for the general election and has said that he is not going to self-fund his race for the general election, and he's going to want the Democratic Party to step in. So in a race where the resources are closer to equal, he would have a real problem, I think. David Trone in a general election. I think I'd beat Larry Hogan in a general election, and I think he believes that too.
Okay, Executive Alsobrooks, thank you for being here. I live in Prince George's County, so you're my county executive.
Here.
You've done an excellent job. My question for you, since you're a pro-Israel Democrat, and I would ask a parallel question of a pro-Israel Republican, there's been an increasing amount of anti-Semitism, and there have been some Democratic Party members that have been vehemently anti-Israel and some of them anti-Semitic. So how would you address, as part of the same party, the unfortunate people within the party who are not supportive of Israel and even worse?
Yeah, so the people who you're saying are anti, they're anti almost everything. We have extremes in either party, and I can tell you that I am not a part of either. And so the both parties, I know the individuals you're talking about. And I am a balanced person. I'm not a person who, in other words, let's say this, I believe in bringing people together. I think it is the job of a leader to find a way to engage people and to come to bring people closer together, not to divide. And that is no part of my leadership style is that. And I believe that sometimes, it is difficult because, to quote my father again, he says, sometimes it is the case that how people see things depends on where they sit. And he encourages me that it'll be the case, sometimes I'll be surrounded by people who disagree. And that's okay too. But there has to be a way, I think, if you listen, the most important quality of any leader is to listen. To first listen and try to understand what people are saying and then find a way forward. We need a way forward. We need fewer and fewer people, like the people we have seen in Congress, who don't listen to anyone, who don't care necessarily about solving any problems. We look at Speaker Johnson, and I know that in this moment, he today is doing some things that are really forward. Those people are not interested in solving the problem. They're all playing games. And I am interested in moving us forward, of finding a way. I think the issues of the day are too serious. And so the people who you're talking about, there are some people, I'll say it this way, they specialize in the problem. You ever met that kind of person? They're more interested in talking about it than fixing it. I don't want to be a part of that group. And so listening, finding a way forward, and I believe that it is possible for us, even in this most difficult time. I think President Biden is a person who's interested in working in results and fixing things. He's not a bomb throwing kind of inflammatory. He wants to bring us together. And I think, that's the kind of leader that I am.
At a candidates forum Sunday morning for the Board of Education, I was surprised to learn that 6 of 11 candidates for the Board of Education of Montgomery County are in favor of voluntary prayer during school day. So I wanted to ask you where you stand on prayer in public schools.
A voluntary prayer? What is that? I'm sorry.
It wasn't, right, there isn't a proposal that I'm aware of, but we had a lightning round and we just wanted to kind of make sure that people are in favor of, religious freedom and some. So we asked the question that said, if proposed, would you be in favor of an optional prayer to start the school day?
Oh,
And 6 candidates raised their hand, yes. So
well,
I thought I should ask that question of
yeah.
some of them might be our next senator.
So we're a little different than, I hadn't heard any proposal like that one, but what I can tell you is that I represent a county that is a county of many faiths. And part of the strength of our county is that we have, a really beautiful, and all-inclusive faith community and I have hosted a number of interfaith breakfasts and other things. We've had members of the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Christian community, and it is what makes us so beautiful. So, I respect the right to practice your faith and religion. In fact, I think it's important, and would support any, and of course, families teach their children how to practice their faith, and I support practice of faith, but I don't think the government should be involved in telling people how to practice faith. But I certainly do believe that faith is a really large and important part of our communities, but I would never want to support something that made people uncomfortable or alienated any faith. So, I think that's better left to parents to help decide how to help their children practice their faith. I don't think the government.
First, thank you for being here. I'm executive, and thank you for my mom was just retired a couple of years ago from 25 years as a teacher in Prince George's County Public Schools. My question is regarding housing in Prince George's County. How you see that as on a more national level? In the last few years, we saw in Prince George's County there was a moratorium for a while on evictions during the COVID era. There was rent control was implemented, which provided relief to a lot of tenants, renters maybe were not moving up the economic ladder. And we've also seen Prince George's County exercise their first right of refusal when apartment buildings trade, and that keeps housing affordable. The flip side is that from the view of the private sector, we're seeing a flight of capital, of private investment and ownership moving away from Prince George's County because they're afraid of their investment value going down, or worse, losing money on apartments and housing that they can't really turn a profit on. So can you talk a little bit to us about your policy then in County and going forward on a national basis?
Thank you. I can. So, I'll discuss it this way. My parents married very young, 21 and 22. And during their time, 5 years after marriage, they could buy a modest home. I believe that home ownership is important. I believe that housing affordability is a foundational issue. That families ought to be able to afford housing. And I believe in communities that also have mixed income housing available also. But housing is in our state, and you recognize this across the state, housing affordability across the states, that people want to know that they'll be able to afford housing. I have taken this on as an issue in Prince George's County, as one that has been a part of our priority as we have invested in the county and sought to grow it. We know that you also have to do to make sure that you're investing in affordable housing in a very intentional way. That's how we came about the program you talked about, the right of first refusal, for example, in areas like the area along the Purple Line, making sure that as those areas become more investment rich, that we want to make sure that we find a way to have some of the people who've been there over years be able to afford to continue living there. So we've used the right of first refusal there. We've also invested in the Housing Investment Trust Fund to make sure that we are preserving affordability in our county. But these are very strategic and well thought out tools to use to be able to preserve affordability. I do not agree, however, with some of the decisions of the county council there. And I think some of them, sometimes their decisions, I might say, fall into that category my father talked about, people know more than they understand. I think maybe the end goal is a good one, but I think that sometimes they have done things that do not help the larger goal. So, for example, we have a council that tried to basically cut out townhomes, passing some legislation that would have only allowed townhomes at like transit hubs. Townhomes are entry points for many first-time home buyers. So making it more expensive to be able to get into a townhome, I think is it's short-sighted. I think some of the talk about the cap, I think that some of that, as you mentioned, as well-intentioned as it was, I think that it had the effect of causing some of the home builders and others who wanted to come into our county to say they're leaving, that they no longer want to do business in our county. So I think that housing affordability is a top issue. It's one that I will continue to remain committed to because I understand first that it ought to be, again, the opportunity of everyone to have the ability to buy a home, and it's where wealth is built. A lot of people have their wealth in homes, but I don't think we pass policies that discourage investment. I think we have to be very careful, which is why I say this. I think that even in the Senate, you give me a chance to say this. That's why it's important to have people not only understand policy, but how they implement it and the practical impact of the policy passed. We don't want to pass policies that discourage business or run it out of or discourage investment. These are the communities that need the investment. They often need the investment to grow amenities, to grow entertainment, and to grow our communities. And so we have to have people, I think, who are balanced in their thinking and who understand, again, the practical impact, not just passing policies. And that sometimes happens, people just pass policies. It had to be executive, like me, the person who had to try to attract investment. I want the county's economy to continue to grow. So we have to make the decisions that help us to do both, help people to have homes and also attract investment.
Thank you for doing an amazing job in sharing your values and your views. So my question is more about your campaign and what are you able to do in terms of reaching out to the college age students?
Thank you so much for that. So as I've mentioned to you, we've had to have a grassroots effort. This campaign is grassroots grown. And one of the constituencies that we've had great success in reaching out to are college students who are on fire. I was just last week, I was so pleasantly surprised to go to the University of Maryland College Park. I had 80 kids waiting for me at 8 o'clock at night, and they were fired up. And these kids are so bright, and they have the most intelligent things to say. If we listen to these kids, I'm telling you, we're going to solve a lot of the world's problems. Listen to a lot of them who had really intelligent things to say, but they're working as fellows in our campaign. So I've been there. I've been to University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, and UMBC, and so Towson. We've been Washington College. So we've been across the state organizing a lot of our kids who are coming out to support me in good numbers. It does also help that I have an 18-year-old. She wrote me yesterday, and it was so funny. We were not on TikTok. I am not on TikTok, but apparently I found that we were missing communicating with a whole group of people. So I said to the campaign, "You've got to get me up on TikTok." And she wrote me last night and said, "Oh my gosh, are you on TikTok?" Yeah. Yeah, she's like, "Mommy, like, what are you doing on TikTok?" I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm trying to talk to your friends." So
So we're working to, we want to engage everyone in this campaign. I have worked hard to get to every corner of the state. I can say this about, again, the ability to win the campaign. I do believe we are on course to win. And the reason is you have learned about David Trone on television, and I've had the great opportunity to have people learn about me in their living rooms. I've been literally in the living room 7 days a week for this whole year. 7 days a week, people have been so generous to host me. And I think in the end, that's going to make a big difference. It's going to the people. Thank you. Like, yeah, what are you? Yeah, of course. I don't want anyone not to answer, to be able to ask their question. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been a great presentation. I want to shift gears a little bit to another policy issue that you might well face as our next senator, and that is healthcare in America. The best healthcare I ever received was for my infant daughter. It was caring, it was thorough, it was affordable, it was in Guatemala. We don't have that here for many of us. It's not equitable across the country. It's not affordable for many. Drugs are out of sight, and people are left with crippling debt from surviving cancer. They may survive the cancer, but not the debt. Any creative ideas for dealing with our healthcare?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. You know what? I thank you for that, because I think I forgot to go in depth about this. This is an issue, as I mentioned. Healthcare is a real priority for me, and it is also one that we recognize bankrupt families. I mean, the issue around healthcare affordability is a real issue. I will continue to work to build, for example, on the Affordable Care Act. When we talk about how important this election is, recognize the same Affordable Care Act that allowed 22 million additional people to have insurance. The one that for people like me, my daughter will be 19 soon, allows us to keep our kids on our insurance until they're 26. The same one that said that we couldn't discriminate based on these pre-existing conditions. And for the women in the room, we know that it used to be the case that being a woman was a pre-existing condition. That Affordable Care Act is the one that President Biden has built on to cap the out-of-pocket cost, for example, of prescription drug medications, allowing Medicare to negotiate directly with the pharmaceutical companies to cap the out-of-pocket cost of prescription drugs for seniors. We have to do that for more families. We have to also, he's capped the out-of-pocket cost of insulin at $35. We have to do that for more families. I'll be working to also expand the amount of funding available for Medicaid, which is really important. There are some states that have refused to put the money into Medicaid, but we have to continue to expand healthcare access, dental care, vision care. These are all of the opportunities we have to build on the Affordable Care Act, the same one that Donald Trump says he wants to repeal. So again, when we talk about the stakes of this election, and he is serious about it, and I don't have any doubt that Larry Hogan will vote with the Republican caucus. He just will. But what's at stake is so clear to me, because I am a part of the thing they call the sandwich generation, which means I am not only caring for this 18-year-old, I have loving, caring parents who are aging, who come to my house almost every day. My mom has, very serious health conditions. She has dementia, she has other conditions, and watching my father went back and took on a part-time job. And I went to him and said, well, what are we doing here? He said, he started telling me about the expenses. Just this last 2 weeks, I can tell you this. My dad went to the doctor 2 weeks ago for a heart condition. He was prescribed Eliquis. I understand it's $800 was the copay for the Eliquis. My mother, he took to the doctor yesterday. My sister said, well, whatever prescription they prescribe is $150 something per month, just one prescription. So we are not talking about, and guess what? This is happening to families all across Maryland and all across the country, and the average senior cannot afford it. So I'll be working, and the average family can afford it. So healthcare is something I absolutely working to try to continue to bring it down, but the Republicans will not do it. It's the Democrats, and it is President Biden who's taken on this issue, and I will continue to do so.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and what you're doing, and it's amazing. I'm really worried about the public schools because all the time there's so many anti-Semitism in the community, and it's never been like this ever in the world. So how would you respond to it? How would you help the school systems in Maryland?
Yeah, so I think President Biden has taken a leadership role on this issue, and I recognize that there is, for example, through the Department of Justice, a number of initiatives that are designed to focus on anti-Semitism that we're seeing in our communities at large, because remembering that, of course, this issue was present long before October 7th, and we saw a lot of it right here in Maryland. So I know the Department of Justice has a program called United Against Justice. United Against Hate. And there are a number of other initiatives that the Biden administration has put forward. I was able to meet with the American Jewish Committee. Thank you. We had a really robust conversation regarding anti-Semitism. I think one of the things that's going to be important is to have diverse voices speaking on this issue. I can tell you that not only will I support policies that really ensure that we are cracking down on hatred and anti-Semitism, but I think it's important to have people who use their voices to speak out against it as well, and people who are able to, again, when I talk about really connecting with people, one of I think the strongest kind of antidotes to hate is really just listening to people and really trying to work to get people to, I think you can't legislate all of it. Some part of it's going to have to come about as a result of understanding. And I think I have the capacity to be a person who not only is there on the floor legislating, but we have to have real live people go out and speak out against it and talk about it. And the only way to heal it is to acknowledge it and talk about it. I don't think you can heal anything to see. And helping people to see it, I think is going to be important. And I think you have to prosecute people who participate in acts of hate. I do. I think you have to hold people accountable. So, in everything, holding people accountable, making sure that we're passing policies, and making sure that we're out talking and who are visible and helping to address the issues. That's what I would do. So I just want to thank you all so much for allowing me the opportunity to talk. For anyone that we did not have a chance to answer all your questions, I have Jordan Hines, who is here, who's our political director. And I'm interested in staying in touch with you. I would be a poor candidate if I did not also ask you for your support. That would make me a horrible candidate if I didn't ask you for your vote. We have 28 days until Election Day. This is, again, a very consequential election, but I am really, really grateful for your generosity in having me here, and for all who have been friends and helping to support for so long. Joan is here and others. So thank you so much, everybody.
So everybody, you've already done it, but I'd like you to give another warm round of applause. County Executive, thank you for your friendship, your support, making yourself available, and best of luck. Everyone, this is going to be a very low turnout primary. The Jewish communal vote is going to constitute an extraordinary percent of that vote. Please make sure you go out and vote. Practice your democratic right. Thank you very much.